right, are we ready to go? Excellent. It is 3:30 p.m. and I call to order the Board of Trustees 2024-2025 Budget Workshop. Gosh, we're in the middle of the decade already. How about that? I am going to, we need to call this order. Do we need to approve the agenda for the workshop, do you think? Yes. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Madam Chair, I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Thank you, Mrs. Henson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. McCown. Is there any discussion? And again, this is a budget workshop, and we've got our fine budget and finance folks with us. All right. All in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? The motion carries. All right. I'm going to turn things over to Ms. Jennifer Miller, and who's going to lead the budget workshop.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Anne Marie Green, Superintendent Dr. Postleway, and board members. We're here this afternoon to talk about the general fund budget. This is the budget workshop for 24-25. I know it looks a little different. Typically, we would be seated on the floor and be collaborating, so this feels a little awkward, but please feel free to stop us between sections and ask your questions. We definitely want to make sure we have a workshop environment. Uh-oh, I broke it already, so that's over. Okay. As we discussed last month, we have a modified zero-based budgeting approach we've taken this year. That means we did not just start with our current budget and say, what are we going to add, what are we going to subtract? We really took a look at everything and tried to make sure we were budgeting what does it take to actually operate a school. And as you know, this is not a simple process. It is a very long process, and I appreciate all of the fellow senior leadership team members, definitely with a zero-based approach. It took a lot of hard work on their parts as well, and their team, particularly my finance team. We couldn't do it without them with giving us the data, so we really appreciate everyone's hard work. And with that, I believe I am turning it over to Mrs. Devonna Price.
Okay. So we are going to start with our 24-25 preliminary school position allocations. And as we shared last time, these numbers are preliminary. We have tried to use our school-based formulas to establish our projections for each location. But as we shared last time, those are fluid. We try to tighten those down as much as we can, but we do have changes that are still being tweaked. You will see a couple of changes there. We have a couple of additions in our teacher positions as we are still trying to make adjustments. High school schedules, for example, are still being fine-tuned. We don't expect those to be perfect at this point as students are still making selections and we're still fine-tuning those. You'll have categories such as our, like that instructional assistant bucket. It's IEP season. IEPs are taking place and they're still assigning one-to-ones and those types of positions. So, those buckets of positions will continue to change as those types of positions are allocated. So you will see some changes in there from the last PowerPoint slide that we did as we have updated those numbers and services have been adjusted for that particular slide. For our central services slide from last time, we have made a couple of changes as well. I think we wanted to especially note the transportation allotment. You'll see the number there of 209, which is down quite drastically from 232 from before, even though the allocation has changed. And I think Clerk Cooper wanted to speak to that for just a moment.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So the 232 number was a number that did roll up. Of course, with the addition of Mr. Hall leading the transportation department, he's been working very diligently at refining the numbers of drivers that we should be allocated based on our routing, and total employees in the transportation department should be at 209. So that's a testament to his hard work working on getting where we need to be. Of course, we still are operating in a bit of a deficit with drivers. There is a shortage. We are very thankful of y'all and appreciate y'all coming and riding the routes. And I think not only was that a good event, the information that was gleaned, and then y'all took forward to state legislatures for them, making an allowance for retirees to be exempt from the earning limitation as bus drivers. That's a huge win for that department. So very appreciative of that. But we continue with Mr. Hall at the helm to work at, continue to refine the number of drivers that we need, and then also the amount that we need in temporary salary, because our other positions, such as driver trainers, they all pull double duty. They are route drivers in addition to their training. And with the hiring that we have in transportation, that temporary salary account does get used. So developing the appropriate budgeted amount for that's a major priority for us for the 24-25 school year.
And just wanted to, remind everyone that even though this is labeled central services allocations, a lot of these staff members are staff members that go out into our schools and support schools. And for both of these slides, we budget these at 100%. We, of course, would love to fill all of them, and that is our goal to do so. So that is the 100% allocation that you would see to staff us at 100% for each of those positions.
All right, the next slide, you can see this is the state teacher salary scale. This is the minimum salary scale. On the left-hand side is what they currently have. And then you can see on the right-hand side, this is the proposed House Ways and Means scale. This is not final yet. We are still waiting for final legislation, but we wanted to make sure we presented that this evening to show you what the current legislators are discussing at the state level, but it will most likely change. And then on this slide, I know it's very hard to read, but this is Lexington One's current scale on the left-hand side, and then what it would look like if we adopted the House Ways and Means version of the salary scale. Now, just to give you some unknowns that we're dealing with on the salary scale, if we were to take our current salary scale and just make sure we're in compliance with the state minimum salary scale, that would cost us about $1 million, and that would only impact about half our teachers getting an increase because not all cells would need to be adjusted. So at a minimum, we would have to spend $1 million to adjust the salary scale based on what data is currently available out there in legislation. Now, the other piece we can look at is if we increase our scale by the same amount that the House Ways and Means increased each cell. If we did that, it would cost us approximately $7.7 million. But you have to keep in mind that that would be teachers only, and also each cell is not increased by the same amount, so it's not very equitable. So the other option for that would be a cost of living increase, which would impact all employees. A 3% increase would cost approximately $8.4 million. Now that would be all employees receiving a 3% increase. And then we would still need to adjust a couple of the cells on the teacher salary scale, so another $240,000. So approximately $8.6 million is what it would cost to give everybody a cost of living increase.
And that's about 26 mils.
You know I'm not good at math in my head.
Is that right? 8.6 million is about 26 mils, right? 8 times 3.
All right. Any other questions before I move on? Okay. And with that, I will turn things over to...
So I do have a question.
Okay, absolutely.
So required change in teacher scale, that's just if we change the cells that don't meet the minimum.
That's correct.
But some cells increase by more than others do.
Correct.
When you have on here increase teacher, so what's the difference in the 1 million and then going to the 7 million?
So the 7 million is if we increased each cell by the amount that the state minimum cells increased. The one is
The
just
one with the
matching to the
biggest
state.
jump.
The
Okay.
other one is actually doing the same dollar increase of
For
each cell.
every cell.
Correct.
And with this cost of living increase, would that be keeping the increase for the teacher cells and then doing 3% for the remaining of staff, or just taking the minimum schedule and increasing that by 3%?
It would be taking our current scale and increasing it 3%, then evaluating the teacher scale to see who now is not meeting the minimum requirement, and that's where that $240,000 comes from. That's to bump it the few cells that did not go up.
And that's that 238,000.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Ms. Miller, I got a question. We talk about increasing our amount for the House Ways and Means budget. Now, looking at the Lexington One budget compared to the House Ways and Means, there's some sales that are lower.
That's correct.
So are we talking about adjusting those people down also and up? Or we're just
No,
talking-
sir, we would just leave them as is. We would not decrease them. We would just increase the ones to make sure we meet the minimum requirement.
Okay, so we would hold them harmless, and then everybody else that's required a bump would get a bump.
Correct.
Okay.
All right. And with that, I'll turn things over to Mrs. Mary Gaskin.
Thank you. At an earlier board meeting, we talked about the increase in challenging behaviors and the need to do some additional research to determine how we might provide more intensive interventions along the continuum of services for students. And so we've done that research, and tonight I'd like to share a proposal for two different programs that really meet two different needs, and I'll go into detail for both. The first is the ATLAS program, Achieving Through Learning and Support, that is intended to serve students in grades pre-K through 5 who demonstrate challenging behaviors that significantly impact their ability to succeed in a traditional school setting. So I'm going to go into detail about that program. And then the second, the CONNECT program, which is intended to serve students with significant cognitive and developmental delays in that same grade span, pre-K through 5, whose maladaptive behavior cannot be managed in a self-contained classroom in a traditional school setting. Both of these build on existing structures. So as you know, we've added 5 general ed behavior interventionists that we're fully staffed this year. And so ATLAS would build on the services already being provided by those 5 general education behavior interventionists. We also have reorganized our special education district level team to provide more focused support for behavior. And so the CONNECT program would build on that reorganization to provide more intensive intervention. What these two programs have in common is centralizing some services that already exist while also adding on to that, and I'll explain that in a minute. But they're also intended to be short-term programs that are more intensive with the goal of students returning back to their home schools after they've gone through the program. I do want to say both are contingent on finding the staff members needed to run the programs. So as we designed the Behavior Center, which we're calling ATLAS, we researched in 2 different districts who already had an existing program like this, and they were very generous with everything they learned along the way, and we feel like we can really lean on them if we're to implement this program. And the design you're going to see tonight is really inspired by those 2 programs. So some things were in common. First, they were intensive short-term programs, therapeutic in nature. There was a strong family engagement and support component in both of the programs, constant communication and planning with the home school so that the students stayed connected with the home school and classroom, really firm systems for tracking and monitoring progress and making adjustments. And they both really expressed how important it is to find the right people for these particular programs and then make sure that we're supporting those people with the appropriate training and resources needed. While behavior was the emphasis at the 2 programs we visited, we also saw that students made really significant academic gains while in these programs because of the focused support they were receiving. So here's a program description of ATLAS. Again, the goal is to serve pre-K through 5th grade students, and you see listed here on this slide the behaviors that would be targeted through this program. And so this would be after students had really received both Tier 1 and Tier 2 interventions, really at that Tier 3 level at the school, and consistently not being successful as those Tier 3 interventions are being implemented. Consider this really intensive early intervention with the goal of, again, students going back to their home school. We did find very high success rates at the 2 programs we visited, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. So this particular program is intended to be about a 9 to 18-week program, really tailored to the student's specific needs. The dedicated staff would include a program director, so an administrator, 3 classroom teachers, a special ed teacher, 0.5 counselor. We're going to use one of our existing 5 behavior interventionists and also rely on the support of our partnership with Life Changes for the mental health support. Here you see a program description. I mentioned earlier how important family involvement is in the 2 centers we visited. Really, we want to have a strong partnership so that there's some continuity with the expectations both at school and at home, and the continuity and support as well. There will be a strong component of an individualized behavior intervention plan that is co-created with program staff members, families, homeschool, to make sure we're targeting those behaviors that will help students be successful when they go back to their schools. Behavioral health development will include explicit instruction and activities to build self-awareness, self-management, and social skills. There will be consistent routines, positive reinforcement, and clear expectations. We want on-site, readily accessible professionals who can provide those mental health services. There will be a tight alignment with state standards and the academic instruction kids need to stay on track while they're at the center, and comprehensive support for successful reintegration back into the mainstream when kids go back to their home school. This gives just an overall of what a student's experience will look like while at Atlas. Again, that strong connection to the home school is the first driver there, but we will also want to ensure that it's a supportive environment. Those predictable routines will be essential. There will be a focus on the transferable skills that kids will need to succeed in classrooms moving forward. We'll teach students how to manage change, build relationships. We want to make sure they learn to be contributors to their community, and we'll vary learning based on both academic and behavioral needs. So how do we design this program? We'll need an isolated wing of an existing elementary school with a dedicated space and familiarity. So if we want these students to be successful when they go back to their elementary school, we want to make sure they're learning in an environment like one they'll go back to. We'll need a separate entrance and exit and a dedicated place for both car riders and bus riders to be dropped off and picked up each day. That will assist with those smooth transitions, and playground access, because physical movement will be a huge part of the program. So in terms of the budget for this program, the positions I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to detail again in a minute, will cost approximately $815,000. That includes fringe. Startup fees for furniture and equipment will be around $40,000. Resources and supplies, some of which will need a startup, others would need to be an annual expenditure for that first year, would total about $80,000. We'll need door-to-door transportation to get students to and from the program, and we would share the nurse. The food would come from the cafeteria, and I mentioned earlier the mental health services would be provided by Life Changes, Family Guidance and Wellness, for about $20,000 a year. The success rates at the 2 centers we visited, one had a over 90% success rate when students went back to their school when they came to the program in kindergarten or first grade. About a 75% success rate when they came in later grades, really emphasizing that need for early intervention. The other program had about an 80% success rate across the board, and about 20% of the students who didn't find success when they went back to their school were evaluated and had a cognitive delay that was really impeding their success of, and so behaviors were showing up in the classroom because of that delay. Before I move on to the Connect program, do you have questions about Atlas?
Yes. In the description at the beginning of the, I guess, the students that would be identified for this program.
Yes.
And then your concluding remark about the success rate and the identify with cognitive delays. Will there be any sort of assessment before, because there's such an overlap in those behaviors that it may be autism or ADHD or something that is causing not just, I couldn't tell where there might have been some assessments that take place before they go to Atlas. Will that occur?
So this is an intensive intervention before the evaluation takes place. So these are students who would have received Tier 1 and Tier 2 and probably some Tier 3 interventions before they go to the center. So this is hoping that we can intervene before a student would be evaluated for a disability. But the result could be we've tried all these interventions, even very intensive ones, and now we know we need to do a formal evaluation to see what else is going on.
Okay. And then will, in the Atlas program, I want to make sure that when they, that it's the same, my question is about one-to-one devices. Will they have the same access to devices at Atlas than they do when they return to their classroom? Because I can see that would be a behavior change. And I'm just curious if that's something that's been considered.
I don't know that we've discussed that, but the planning team probably has in that much detail. But we do, before kids return to their home school, we want their day to look as much like it will when they get back to their home school as possible while they're at Atlas. And so even if in the beginning maybe a device wouldn't be used as frequently for whatever purpose, students would go through phases, and we would make sure that they're ready for that when they get back to the
you
home
want to
school.
set them up for success, and if they're going back, they went cold turkey with the device, and then they go back, and that's part of the day in their regular classroom. You want to make sure that they're prepared for that. I've got two more quick questions. And
Sure.
This is just a comment. The student's journey at Atlas. I think that sounds wonderful. I mean, I do have to say that it sounds like what all of our elementary classes should be: a supportive environment, predictable routines, managing change, building relationships. I mean, ideally, that they're getting that in all of our classes. And so I know that this is another layer of that in a smaller setting, but I just thought that just sounded like it described an elementary classroom.
It does. We're trying to emphasize the therapeutic nature of this as well. And behaviors can be very challenging, both for students and staff members, and cause a lot of frustration. And so this is a safe place for kids to work through some of those behaviors that wouldn't be accepted in a traditional school, again, with the goal of learning those behaviors that would be.
And then one more quick question.
Sure.
On the location and space with this extra wing and the transportation and all that, are FERPA considerations built into this, that we don't want to identify these students as just by nature of the fact that they get on a bus and go there?
Right. That's why we want that isolated wing, and that will be important that they have their own entrance and exit.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Do we have a projection of roughly how many students we would expect at any given point in time to be in this Atlas program?
Yes, we'd like to limit it, and we learned this from the centers we visited, to no more than 30 students at a time. We have about 20 students today, if Atlas were open, who I think would be good candidates for the program. 30 at a time, realizing that we would probably serve more like 50 to 75 over the course of the year.
In the program description, you said serving pre-K through 5th grade, and then when you gave success rates, it was for kindergarten and above. And then you talked about going through Tier 1 and Tier 2. So going through all of those steps, do you realistically see preschool students being served by this?
Given the preschool behaviors that we're currently facing, yes.
How early in the year? I mean, how long does it take to go through Tier 1 and Tier 2? I mean, is it a week? Is it a month? Is it 9 weeks?
Well, it depends on the student, too, and the severity of the behaviors. But I would think within the first semester, we would know if a preschool student would benefit from a program like this. But we would want to give it time, absolutely, to try those interventions in that preschool program first.
Ms. Gaskins, trying to understand the continuum of services here. So are you intending it to be fairly prescriptive in the sense that there would be a Tier 1, Tier 2, potentially this program, and then maybe the further continuum, I'm struggling with that word today, would be a 504 IEP? Is that kind of
That's
how you
it,
envision
yes.
Okay. So in a 504 IEP, you have structured accommodations or expectations. would you have a similar guiding document for this program as well?
We would, and we would have a transition plan too. I don't think I emphasized that quite enough. Of when students go back to their schools, they would have a transition plan, and center staff would even spend some time back in that home school helping the student to transition with whatever those accommodations or what have you would need to be.
So in theory, you could actually transition into a 504 or IEP from this program?
You absolutely could, yes.
Thank you.
So would that change then the structure that we currently have? Because I know children now just meet with their counselors and, you know, with the parents, and they just kind of give them the 504. So that would change everything?
Well,
or?
this would provide a lot more data if we get to the point of needing a 504 in terms of what should be included.
Okay, and then don't hate me, but can you walk me down, like Johnny is in first grade and this is what we're seeing in him. Can you just give me like step A through C, whatever?
Sure. So Johnny's teacher has probably tried some documented interventions in the classroom. So
Like
the
reading,
tier one.
Like reading? Are we talking about
Reading
all kinds
and
of
or
things?
behavior. So
Okay.
it could be reading interventions, it could be math interventions. If it's behavior is the issue, and we know that maybe and sometimes it is cognitive, something cognitive is also causing the barrier, but the classroom teacher has documented interventions. The school interventionist is working closely and understands those interventions that are being tried. If the behaviors continue, the behavior interventionists that we have in place are probably being consulted. They might not be working with the student yet, but they are informing those kinds of things that are being tried with the student. If the student is referred to the behavior interventionist does a further assessment, understands what else needs to be tried, will potentially move to tier 2 at that point, try more intensive interventions, maybe working with the behavior interventionist. If that continues till we can't really find that thing that really helps the behavior to at least be diminished at some point, then we would move to tier 3. Sometimes that goes more quickly depending on the severity of the behaviors. We do things like abbreviate a day by the time a student gets to that point, or try some different things within the school building. But if we continue to take a lot of the time of administrators daily and the class disruptions are such that a teacher can't have class, then that's when we really want to think about those tier 3 interventions, especially when it's sustained over time.
Okay. And would you say that we're going to have kids that are in 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade that are would potentially be in this category, but because we haven't had this program until now, like what about those students?
We don't see the need as much in secondary. We are, however, in the past few years seeing more severe needs earlier than we ever have before. So we hope that we can teach kids to self-regulate and cope with these behaviors before they get to middle school. But right now, the real need is prioritized in elementary.
And since you've done all the research, do you happen to have an idea as to why that is? Do you think it's because of all of the technology that these children, I think they're called like iPhone kids now or something like that, where the kids that we're seeing now are just, they've had an iPhone in their hands since they were 6 months old.
So there's definitely the technology piece. There's also other traumas that students have been through at home that trigger these behaviors as well.
Okay. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. All right, are y'all ready to move on to Connect? And I have Dr. Adams with me tonight in case you ask a question I can't answer. Okay, so as a reminder, Connect is a separate program for the board's consideration, and we're going to recommend this program in 3 phases, and so we're going to talk about phase 1 first. And as a reminder, this program would serve students with significant cognitive and developmental delays in grades pre-K through 5, whose maladaptive behavior cannot be managed in a self-contained class in a traditional school setting. And again, the budget here is very fluid because we're centralizing services, so a good many of these staff members already exist. We just need to add a couple. So again, we want to serve students in pre-K through 5th grade here, and This age group is actually going to be the first phase that we're recommending for the Connect program. We do want to extend this to older students in future years. We've talked about here that this is significant cognitive disabilities resulting in skills deficits, mainly with expressive and receptive communication. This is behavior that poses a significant threat to a student's safety and or the safety of others and cannot be controlled in the classroom, even with maximal classroom supports that have been tried. These are students who are otherwise unable to communicate, and that could possibly be the function of the behavior. Some of the techniques that will be used in the program would be based on an individualized treatment plan with individualized interventions and supports planned. We want to identify the relationships between the environmental stimuli, the behavior, and the consequences to understand both why the student is engaging in the behavior and how the behavior can be modified. This, too, is a short-term intervention with about a 6 to 9 week intervention plan. I've already mentioned that the interventions would be tailored to the student's needs, very much more intensive than what we could provide in a traditional school setting. If we needed to provide long-term services, we would look for that more in that school setting, and that would be more of a methodology than just an intensive service. So again, these are behaviors that we believe can be modified through more intensive short-term service. All right, for this program, we'll need a properly equipped classroom within an existing elementary school. Students would have an abbreviated school day, and this would be determined by the IEP team in terms of the amount of time students would spend in the program. They may or may not also spend some of the school day in their traditional school. We would need 1 board-certified behavior analyst, 3 registered behavior technicians, and 2 applied behavioral therapists. And this is very important because we could bill for Medicaid for this program, and these are the positions that would be required in order for us to do so.
Mrs. Gaskins, the required positions here, could you identify who those people are a little better than just the title, like, you know, behavior analyst, exactly what they do, what a behavior technician does, for a little clarity on that?
Absolutely. May I call on Dr. Adams? She has, does that microphone on, or does she need to come to mine?
Is it on? Okay. Board-certified behavior analysts, they're licensed professionals, very often also certified teachers. The program for a board-certified behavior analyst runs concurrently with a teacher certification program. They don't all become certified teachers, but they often receive the same training, initial training as a teacher. Like I said, they are a licensed professional that can bill Medicaid for those services under certain categories. A registered behavior technician is, it's a trademarked position. They are also licensed professionals that requires, it's a 40-hour initial training, and then they have to work underneath a board-certified behavior analyst. So they have to be observed, supervised, and do the work of a board-certified behavior analyst. It's a little bit, if I were to try to draw a layman's or something that you would be more familiar with, it would be like a certified nurse assistant has to work under a nurse, or a licensed practical nurse has to work under a registered nurse. So that relationship has to exist for those folks. The board certified behavior analyst has to be there in order for the registered behavior technician to do their job. The applied behavior technician, the purpose of those 2 positions would be so when those students are then going back to school, that's the person that can help them transition back to school, take everything that those board-certified behavior analysts and registered behavior technicians were doing for those 6 to 9 weeks, and then help the staff at the school to learn how to understand to do all those things. So they would know the student and then also be able to help translate it back to the school. Did that answer the staff questions?
That's it. That's
Okay.
good. Thank you.
So for phase one, which we would like to begin implementing next school year, it would cost about $16,000 for the equipment needed for that classroom. We would need the 2 additional ABTs, or applied behavioral therapists. We already have the other staff in place. Those staff could serve 16 students at a time in a given time period for us to bill Medicaid, which could potentially allow the program to be budget neutral. That's 16 at a time, not over the course of the year. So over the course of the year, many more. And then as we prepare for phase 2, which we'd like to offer out of Rosenwald Community Learning Center, it would cost about $67,000 to upfit that center to be able to offer another class there.
Ms. Gaskins, as far as depending on Medicaid billing, are we waiting on some kind of a ruling, or is it, I guess, do we know that's going to be covered or not, or does it depend on how we administer the program?
It does depend on how we can administer it. That's why the 16-to-1 is so important. It depends on the students in the program who are eligible for Medicaid. So it'd be dependent on the students who are identified by their IEP teams to be eligible for the program.
The sites that you visited, did they have a program like this?
They did not. We have specifically designed this in Lexington One to meet the needs that we feel like we're seeing in our system.
I'm just curious about, because you're talking about some pronounced needs in these severe behaviors, and I'm just wondering if it's realistic to think that a 6 to 9 week intensive, that would be like 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week sort of thing.
The amount of time would depend on what the student needs and what the IEP team determines, of course, with the guidance from our district staff. But right now, our BCBAs are split. Like, they're serving so many students, and their time is really diminished, and their impact is diminished because they're trying to serve so many students. So this would be a way to provide some of the services we're already trying to provide in a much more intensive way. So hopefully we would see an impact in a shorter amount of time.
And how many students, if we had to do it today, do we know approximately how many students would be in that program?
40 to 50, we feel like we can identify today.
But 16
At a time.
at a time.
Mm-hmm.
How many can a BCBA supervise at once in their course load?
The RBTs, how many RBTs?
In order to be able to bill, and then also just the professional recommendation out of that is 16 to 1.
Okay.
So not 16 students in the room at the same time. I mean a caseload
Right.
of 16.
And that's the treatment plans and all the supervision and all of that.
Yes, ma'am.
How many RBTs can a BCBA supervise?
They have to, board-certified behavior analysts are required to provide a minimum of 5% supervision time. So for every RBT they see, they have to supervise them 5% of the time that they are with specific students. That supervision time is really what limits how many kids they can work with at one time, but that same 16 to 1 ratio applies because it's the same person, ultimately, the BCBA, that's responsible for all of that.
And there's also, I'm sorry, getting into the weeds on this a little bit, but there's also all the notes that they have to file in order to bill.
Absolutely.
So it's very work intensive for BCBAs with a caseload that large.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, so this is a total of all of the different positions that we talked about tonight. So the $815,000, including fringe for Atlas, and the 2 ABTs at 102 for the Connect program. Any additional questions?
I'm sorry, the board certified behavior analyst, is that the applied behavior therapist A?
Yes.
Okay. No? We're just trying to marry up the list on one page with the, sorry. Just yell.
If I should.
So we have currently 3 already designated FTE
Gotcha.
Not in it, that is only in addition. So ABT, the applied behavior therapist, that's what we would need additional, just to transition kids back.
Gotcha. Thank you. All right. I'm going to pass it on, to Mary Gaskins. So, yeah, at our last board meeting, we provided you with an overview of programs that we're currently implementing and gave you the cost per program and told you that we would come back tonight with some notes about the impact of each program. I do want to note that we're going to be doing a formal program evaluation that we're going to present to you in April, that plan, and we already know which of these programs we would prioritize for a more formal program evaluation first. And so that is coming. Each of those plans will include implementation goals and metrics that we would use for each program we implement in the district. So until we have that formally in place, we have looked at each program's purpose and aligned the impact that we see currently based on that program's purpose. You have in your folders tonight a more detailed outline of this that includes both program descriptions as well as the schools that are involved in each. Each of the ones here tonight are currently included in the budget we're going to present to you unless we identify that we've already discontinued the program. And so I'm not going to walk through each of these slides unless you have questions about the programs here. I will say the International Baccalaureate middle years, we're continuing to collect qualitative data at the school level on that one. Instructional software includes a rebate from the Department of Education. We're not sure we're getting that rebate again next year. I'm looking at my friend, Dr. Rivers, if he has any update on that. So that budget could potentially increase based on whether we can anticipate that reimbursement again. And then reading recovery will be one of the programs that we will be formally evaluating next year along with our IB programs. We've seen great success in Lexington One with the reading recovery program, but because we've invested so much with ESSER to really build the capacity there, we want to begin to understand that impact in more detail.
Ms. Gaskins, so the middle years IB versus the IB diploma program, are those two totally different things?
So it goes from a whole school implementation, where you see that number in middle school at Beechwood, to only the students who choose to be part of the diploma program in high school. That's why you see that significant.
Do they have to qualify to be part of the diploma program, or can they choose to be part of it in high school?
They don't have to qualify, but they do academic prerequisites.
Okay.
And so their counselor would coach them through that during the IGP process. The IB middle years is only at Beechwood. For the diploma program at LHS, it's like one of the advanced centers of study that a student from any high school could be a part of that program.
Ms. Gaskin, one high-level question. So do we currently have some type of return on investment or formalized program evaluation for each of these today, or is the plan that we're going to start putting those in place?
We do not. The plan is to start putting those in place.
In kind of a tiered methodology, we start with a couple?
Yes.
Okay.
And Dr. Phillips is going to present you all with that plan at the April board meeting.
Beautiful. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You'll see programs that we recommend for continuation that are currently in ESSER, so things that we're recommending that we pick up in the general fund budget. Later tonight, you're going to hear from Tracy Pender an update on mental wellness in the district, and he'll talk more about Care Solace and our mental health therapist during that presentation later this evening.
Mrs. Gaskins, can I ask you another question?
Sure.
The cost for these programs, does that include the FTEs that are assigned to those programs?
These numbers do not. That is just a subscription, the professional learning, the supplies.
Thank you.
That's an important note. Okay. Okay, and so these are programs that we shared with you last month that we're recommending that we discontinue until we have that formal program evaluation piece in place. I'll just share some of the criteria we've used to determine that these are programs that will no longer continue. Some of them are no longer required. Maybe they once were required by law or regulation and are no longer required. We don't have the fiscal or human resources to continue them because of the expense. The need has been diminished. We didn't see much of an impact, or they're not sustainable or equitable in the ways that they're being implemented. So those are some of the criteria we used in determining that we would discontinue these programs.
Ms. Gaskins?
Ms. Gaskins, which one of the 7 have already been discontinued other than expeditionary learning?
Signition, computer science immersion, IB primary years, and self. So IntelliSpark is being used just a little bit right now, but not much. It was mainly used with Lula. And then the behavioral health assessment we will not give after this year, but we did give it this year.
Ms. Gaskin, specific to the high-dose math tutoring, I'm curious about that one. Has that been low interest, not as effective as we thought?
So students who participated regularly, we did see an impact. We had a very difficult time getting students to participate, and we tried in a number of ways. We tried it in the school day, and students had to give up something else in the school day when they did that. And then after school and summer programming we tried, and again, the participation just wasn't there. Students who participated, we certainly saw the impact, but participation was the issue. And it was provided by a vendor. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Ms. Miller.
All right, and I know we are probably pushing on time, so Dr. Postlewaite, will you have a timer for me, or just keep going? Okay. We're now going to talk about the operational budget. We talked about salaries and benefits, so now we're going over to your operational budget. We call it the accounts payable budget, and then we talk about variable and fixed expenses. Now, we have about 5 different categories that these expenses are grouped under. These are not Jennifer Miller likes these categories. These are mandated by the State Department. So we have the bullet points that you see there: purchase services, supplies and materials, capital outlay, other objects, and transfers. So real quickly, purchase services, that's from a third party. We're buying something, a service that they're providing for us. A great example of that is our water bill, our phone bill. Another great example is our substitute teachers that we've outsourced. That's where we charge those. Supplies and materials sounds just like it is, supplies and materials. It can be office supplies, school supplies. There is some technology, instructional materials. The one outlier in that is electricity. Don't ask me why that's in supplies and materials, but it is. Capital outlay, this is where expenditures that are greater than $5,000 and last longer than 1 year, that's where these would have to be coded to. Other objects, this is a fun one. This is the object you put it in if it doesn't fit any of the other objects. So some examples of what's in there are dues and fees, and then your principal and interest payments on debt payments. And then lastly are transfers, and the really only one that impacts the general fund from transfers going out is a proviso to the food service department. This is a required transaction in accounting journal entry, basically. It's not really an expenditure, but we are required to help offset the fringe for food service employees, so that's why we have that.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Could you give us an example of capital outlay? Just something that's under
Sure.
that
A
category?
piece of equipment that you're buying that costs more than $5,000 that's going to last longer than a year. Could be if you're buying a copier machine and you bought it outright instead of leasing it. Pardon? A tractor. A tractor would be a great example as well. Okay, now we're going to talk about some actual dollars in here, and we've taken those same 5 categories and we've split them into 2 columns: fixed costs and variable costs. Fixed costs are expenditures that we really don't have a choice in. We can't find a different vendor to give it to us cheaper, and we really can't just say, well, we're just going to stop using that. A great example is electricity, water. Those are examples of fixed costs. So we have about 15.7 million of fixed costs here in the general fund. And then your variable costs are examples of your supplies, your workbooks, paper, things like that. These are ones that we really took a hard look at and tried to scrub the budget best we could. If you recall, last year we had already decreased these budgets significantly, so we did see that some of these areas we did have to have an increase because of inflation. So the total for the variable costs is approximately 29.5 million. So that brings our total cost of operating budget to $45.2 million. And I will say that is up from last year. It is up about 2.8 million. And again, that is in line with the rising costs and inflation that we're seeing in the economy. So now you'll see here on this graph, this is the thermometer you saw last month where we had our salaries and fringe, and we've added our fixed costs and our variable cost. You can see the total now is $372.8 million. This does not include that cost of living increase for employees because that was one of our unknowns, but we did include that at the very top, and if we did add that, the total would be $381.4 million. Now, we do have slides later on that'll put the cost with the revenue, but right now we're going to switch gears over to fund balance. Just to remind you that our fund balance for the general fund last year was $104.8 million. We're going to focus in on the assigned fund balance. These are the items that the board has voted as assigned. The first line item there is your fiscal year 24 budget appropriation. That was approximately $22.7 million. That was to balance our budget last year. Then you had your capital projects that the board voted on to pay for out of the general fund balance. Those totaled approximately $9.7 million. And then lastly, we had our strategic planning initiatives that lined up with our curriculum audit results and needing a facility study and a demographic study for a total of $400,000. Now let's focus on our unassigned fund balance. You're going to hear at the state level that there's plenty of fund balance out there at the districts and they can just pay for these budget items out of their fund balance, but this is to show you why it's important to have an unassigned fund balance. Our revenue does not come in like your paycheck does every other week. Our revenue comes in on a cyclical basis, and you can see there in October through December, our fund balance gets pretty low, gets down to $50 million, and that's because our tax revenue hasn't started rolling in yet. You'll see the big increase there in January and February is because we finally are receiving our revenue. So that's a reason it's important to have a healthy fund balance. Another reason is our payroll. When we run payroll, and Lindsay Price can correct me if I'm wrong, probably about $12 million every time we run a payroll. So we want to make sure we have cash available to run payroll. That's the last thing we don't want to have money for. Okay, let's talk about revenue. We do have I'll start at the state level. At the state level, the general fund budget is about $700 million lower than last year. The lottery funding is down about $48 million. The total request of $1.7 billion is reoccurring and $3 billion is non-reoccurring. And then lastly, a third of the new money has already been committed. So even if there is new money, it's already been designated for the items that you see on the slide. So the state funding formula, I'm trying not to call it the new funding formula because it's not new anymore. It's here and it's here to stay. The point that I'd like you to take away tonight is it is a very complex formula. You have to not only include our weighted pupil units in the calculation, you have to take your proportionate share of the weighted pupil unit across all the districts in the state. You also have to look at your state and local split, and you have to consider the index of tax-paying ability in the formula. So it's very complex, and I won't torture you with a spreadsheet I have of 3 pages to calculate it. So weighted pupil units, we've gone over this before with the 45th day and the 135th day. Students are weighted, a general education student with a weighting of 1. If the student has disabilities and special needs, they're weighted at a higher amount of 2.6, and you can see the other weightings below that, and there's some add-on weightings. The importance of this is we need to make sure this information is accurate in our system, and then with the funding formula, it's important that it's accurate in all district systems, because now if they have an error, it impacts our revenue as well. Talked about the special days, the 45th and the 135th. Those are the days that we are using our projections this evening based on 45th day revenue, because that's all that's available, because as you can see, the 135th day, we haven't even gotten there yet, but that's the important date. That's the date we're funded on. So that means we spend the whole year operating, and then in the last quarter, we find out what we're really going to get in revenue, and we don't want to find ourselves in a situation where we need to make budget cuts in the last quarter because we are going to receive less revenue. Yet another reason to have a healthy fund balance.
Ms. Miller, I know you're trucking along, but let me ask real quick. So does that mean then that Johnny is a student in Lexington One on the 45th day, and then so we base, and he receives, he goes to class and does all the things with us up until the end of January, and then he withdraws or moves, and so on the 135th day, he's not on our roll, and so all that money that we spent serving Johnny while he was in our school, he's not in our counts for the money that we actually get. Is that correct?
He is in the count because it's an average, so it does include his time that he was there in the beginning of the year, but as you can tell, the average is going to drop because he's no longer at the school, so you don't get the full credit.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we've got some slides in here. You have the information with more detail in your packets. But this is the index of tax-paying ability that I mentioned is part of the funding formula. You can see Lexington One has stayed at the same percent, 1.89%, but we have gone up in ranking. The column on the left is the 24 tables, and you can see we went from 14th highest in the state up to 12th highest in the state. So what that means is the higher up we go, the more ability we have to pay for operation of our schools out of our local funds. Next, we took data from across the state, and this is older data, but it really does show you the difference between assessed values across the state and how much they vary, and also the value of a mill. I just randomly selected 4 districts. We've got Allendale that you can hardly even see, Lexington One, Horry County, and Greenville. So you can see that Greenville has much more a higher bar there because they have more property that they can assess taxes on compared to Lexington One. Then also moving over to the far right, the value of a mill, you can see that when Lexington One raises the value of a mill, it's about a $300,000 amount that we can receive. If we were in Horry County, when they raise a value of a mill, it could be over $2 million. So there's such a wide variety between the different districts across the state. This slide is showing us our top 10 taxpayers from 2022. It's important to understand that on the operating side of a school district, homeowners are not paying taxes on their primary residence, so they're not helping fund to pay the teacher's salary. This burden really does fall on our businesses, and you can see the top 10 businesses here. And this is, we are very appreciative of those businesses, and we always encourage you to shop locally as well, because that is your way that you can help support the operation of the school district by helping those businesses. So here's our revenue. Again, I said the state revenue is based on projections of the 45th day. We did see quite a bit of an increase there, but that number is going to change when it becomes the 135th, and we'll keep you updated on that. Starting at the top, though, our local revenue, you can see we're projecting it to be about 5.7 million higher. Part of that is based on growth in millage, and then the other part is interest income. We're still seeing pretty significant good rates on our investments, so we were able to increase that projection. Moving down to the state revenue, that's not just the state funding that we talked about. That also includes your Act 388 funding, which we're projecting to go about 2.2 million higher. We also have some motor carrier and manufacturing reimbursement revenue, which is about 1.5 million more. So the total of that is about 13.3 million. So that is good news. And then transfers in, I know they call it that, but it's really more of the state funding that's recorded in another fund, and we have to move it over to the general fund. So that decrease is coming from that state aid to classrooms with about 88,000. So that brings our total proposed projected revenue to approximately $359.5 million, which is up about 18.9 from last year. And keep in mind, this does not include that fund balance that was assigned to help balance the budget last year in last year's column. All right, I believe this is our last slide, but this is where I promised I would show the estimated costs matched up to the estimated revenue. So on the left-hand side, we've talked about all the figures, so I'm not going to go into the figures, but you see your total there of the $372.8 million on the left side. If we were to add that cost of living increase, that would bring that total to 381.4. Then over on the right-hand side, like we just talked about, the total projected revenue is $359.5 million. The math there is that we have a 21.9 shortfall, and we would need to decide how we go forward from here on trying to balance that budget. And with that, I will turn it over for questions and discussion.
So last year in that TBD category, we allocated about 22 million, correct?
What category?
In where you have TBD.
Oh, yeah, to be determined.
Yeah.
Sorry, yes, ma'am. We had
22
22 point something in that.
Right, and how much of that have we actually used?
I am projecting that we may not even touch any of it. I think we're going to probably see a break even this year. It could go into it slightly, or it could be out of it slightly, but I think it's going to be close to a break even.
Okay.
So, Ms. Miller, going back to slide 47, where you were showing the general fund unassigned fund balance as a percentage of budget, it looks like the blue line, which represents fiscal year 2024, is consistently above the 2022 line, but below the 2023 line. Is there an explanation for that?
Yes, sir. When you assign the fund balance, it
Okay.
took it from the unassigned category, and that's why it's lower in 24 versus 23.
Okay.
Did that answer the question?
Yes, I was
Okay.
trying to see if there was a pattern of something where maybe we were getting better, but or maybe some of the decisions that we've actually made have allowed us to free up more unassigned fund balance, but that may not be correct. That may be incorrect.
It's really
assumption.
from the assigned fund balance.
Okay.
Any other questions?
We've still got 3 months to ask you more questions.
Absolutely.
Thank you. We just want to thank the board for coming in early today. We know it made a long day for you because we have a meeting next. We weren't able to create the workshop setting. And I especially want to thank all the staff who presented tonight and the many people sitting here in the audience who are also staff members who prepared all the work that went into most of these slides, not taking anything away from senior leadership team, but if you're part of the finance department, will you please stand so that we can recognize you tonight? Thank you. Thank you very much for all your hard work. And if you were part of putting together the Connect program, I guess that's you. Nicole, thanks, we appreciate that. And the others from instructional services who've been part of the planning on all of the program analysis and the hard work on recommendations moving forward. So if you all would stand, all of you who are part of instructional services. Thank you all very much. Kimberly, we see you at the back table there. Thanks for all of your work with Lindsay in reconciling people and money. It's just thanks, y'all did a wonderful job, and I'm so proud to be part of this team. So thank you very much.
All right. Do I hear a motion to adjourn the board workshop?
Madam Chair, motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Do I have a second? Second. Thank you, Mrs. Henson. Is there any discussion? We've got a few more things to do tonight, so don't go far. All right. All in favor of adjourning, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We will adjourn for about 30 minutes, and we'll be back at 5 to begin our regular monthly meeting with executive session.